The page numbers went from 7 to 9. I noticed it on my third read-through of Sarah's will, 2 weeks after the funeral, sitting at the dining table with documents spread across the cherry wood she'd refinished herself. The pagination ran clean through 6 sections, then skipped. Page 8 was gone. I checked the file the attorney had sent. Same gap. I checked the copy I'd printed. Same skip. My hands went still on the paper. 23 years practicing estate law, and I'd never seen a missing page in a properly executed will. Sarah had used Davidson & Moore, the firm that handled most of the medical community's estate planning. They didn't make pagination errors. I called the office the next morning. The paralegal pulled the file and scanned through. She put me on hold. When she returned, her voice had that careful quality people use when they're reading a note someone else wrote. She said Mr. Davidson would call me back. He never did. I set the will aside and returned to the mechanics of closing Sarah's life. Bank accounts, insurance policies, the title on her car. Each document required a death certificate. I'd ordered 20 copies. I was down to 11. The house felt larger than it had. We'd raised 2 children here, sent them to college, watched them build lives in other states. After they left, Sarah talked about downsizing. I said we should wait. Real estate was an appreciating asset, I told her. She'd smiled the way she did when I answered a human question with a financial principle. She stopped mentioning it. I worked from home now. The office felt wrong without the drive to shape my day. I took calls in my study, reviewed contracts at the dining table, billed hours in quarter increments the way I always had. Colleagues sent messages about taking time. I sent back case updates and deadline confirmations. Sarah had been a nurse practitioner, 31 years at the same clinic. Her patients brought casseroles and flowers for weeks after she died. They left them on the porch when I didn't answer the door. I stacked the dishes in the garage freezer. The flowers I threw away once they wilted. I didn't know what else to do with them. The will itself was straightforward. She'd divided her retirement accounts between our daughter Emma and our son Jack. She left the house to me with a provision that I couldn't sell it for 5 years. Her personal effects went to Emma. Her medical books went to a scholarship fund she'd established. Everything else was liquidated and split. The 5-year provision had surprised me. We'd discussed estate planning the way we discussed most things, efficiently and without drama. She'd never mentioned restricting the house. When I asked Davidson about it in the initial meeting, he said it was a common way to prevent hasty decisions during grief. I'd accepted the explanation because it was logical and because I had no immediate plans to move. But the missing page stayed with me. I went through Sarah's office. At home, a small room off the kitchen that she'd used for patient notes and insurance paperwork. Her desk was walnut, another refinishing project. She'd stripped and stained it herself, working in the garage over a weekend, while I attended a conference in Chicago. I'd come home to find it installed, the surface smooth and dark. Her files were organized by year. I found tax returns, mortgage statements, medical records for both of us going back a decade. Nothing about the will. I checked her laptop. The password was our anniversary. Inside, I found spreadsheets for household expenses, scanned insurance cards, a folder of recipes she'd never cooked. No legal documents. I called Emma. She was living in Portland, working as a software engineer. She answered on the 4th ring. Her voice had that distant quality that meant she was doing something else while talking. I asked if her mother had mentioned anything about the will. Emma said no. Why? I told her about the missing page. She was quiet for a moment, then asked if it mattered. The will was valid, wasn't it? I said yes, it was valid. Then what was the problem? I didn't have an answer that made sense out loud, so I said I was probably overthinking it. We talked about her work for a few minutes, then said goodbye. Jack was harder to reach. He was teaching English in South Korea, 14 hours ahead. When we finally connected, he sounded tired. I asked the same question. He gave the same response. He added that Mom had always been thorough, so if there was a missing page, maybe it wasn't meant to be in the official file. I asked what he meant by that. He said he didn't know, just a thought, and then his connection dropped. I sat with that for a while. Not meant to be in the official file. Sarah had been precise about everything. If a page was missing, it was missing on purpose. I went back to her office. This time I moved slower, opening every drawer completely. checking for anything taped to the underside or tucked in the back. In the bottom drawer, behind a stack of old patient care manuals, I found a locked metal box. It was small, the size of a hardcover book, with a combination lock. I tried our anniversary, wrong. I tried her birthday, wrong. I tried the kids' birthdays in sequence, wrong. I sat on the floor with the box in my lap and tried to think like Sarah. She wasn't sentimental about dates. She remembered them, acknowledged them, but didn't attach meaning the way some people did. I tried the date we bought the house. The lock clicked open. Inside was a single piece of paper, standard letter size, the same stock as the will. At the top it said page 8 in the same font as the rest of the document. Below that was a handwritten letter. Sarah's handwriting, the small, precise script she used for notes. It wasn't a legal clause. It was addressed to me. The first line said, "If you're reading this, it means you cared enough to look." I sat on the floor of her office and read the rest. It took 3 minutes. When I finished, I read it again. Then I folded it carefully and put it back in the box. The letter explained why the house couldn't be sold for 5 years. It explained why she'd structured the will the way she had. It explained a great deal about the last 2 years of our marriage that I'd chosen not to see. Sarah had been diagnosed with lupus 4 years before she died. It was manageable with medication and monitoring. She continued working, continued her routines. I continued mine. I took her to appointments when my schedule allowed. I paid the medical bills. I asked how she was feeling and listened to her answers while checking my phone. She wrote that she'd tried to tell me she needed more than logistics. She'd tried in the small ways people try when they don't want to create conflict. She'd asked if I wanted to take a weekend trip. I'd said after this case closed, she'd suggested we start hiking again like we used to. I'd said my knees weren't what they used to be. She'd asked if we could have dinner together without my laptop at the table. I'd said I was billing hours. The letter wasn't angry. That was what made it harder to read. It was clear and factual, the way she talked to patients when explaining a diagnosis. She wrote that she understood I was dealing with things by working. She understood I showed care through providing and planning. But she needed me present, not just reliable. She'd asked me directly once, about a year before she died. We were in the kitchen. She was making coffee. She turned and said, "When did we stop being people who talk to each other?" I'd said we talked all the time. She'd said, "We coordinate. We don't talk." I'd told her I didn't know what she meant, and then my phone rang. It was a client. I took the call. When I came back, she was gone. I assumed the conversation was over. She wrote that she'd spent the next year watching me choose work over presence. She wrote that she'd stopped trying to compete for my attention because it made her feel small. She wrote that she still loved me, but didn't know if I loved the person she was or just the idea of being married. The 5-year restriction on the house was her way of making me stay in one place long enough to notice it. She wrote that if I sold it and moved immediately, I'd just build another life around avoidance. But if I had to stay, I'd have to sit with what we'd built together. I'd have to see the refinished furniture and the garden she'd planted and the 1,000 small choices she'd made to turn a structure into a home. She wrote that she wasn't trying to punish me. She was trying to give me a chance to understand what I'd missed. The letter ended with a single line. "I hope you find what you're looking for, and I hope it's not just another case to close." I sat on the floor until the light changed and the room went gray. Then I put the letter back in the box and locked it. I placed the box back in the drawer behind the patient manuals. I went to the kitchen and stood at the sink where she'd asked me when we stopped talking. I couldn't remember what I'd said after the phone call ended. I couldn't remember if I'd apologized or explained or if I'd simply moved on to the next task. Over the following days, I began to notice things I'd trained myself to ignore. The dining table had a groove near my usual seat where I'd dragged my laptop night after night. The study had a coffee ring on the desk from a mug I'd left sitting for weeks. Sarah's handwriting was on notes throughout the house, reminders about mortgage payments I'd said I'd handle, appointments I'd said I'd schedule, light bulbs I'd said I'd replace, all of them checked off in her hand. I called Emma again. This time I asked her directly. Had her mother talked to her about feeling alone in the marriage? Emma was quiet for a long time. Then she said yes. I asked when. She said about 2 years ago. She said Mom had called late one night and cried, which wasn't something she did. Emma had asked what was wrong. Sarah said she felt invisible. Emma had offered to come home for a visit. Sarah said no, it was fine. She just needed to say it out loud to someone. I asked if Emma had told me. She said no. She said Mom asked her not to. She said Mom didn't want to make me feel guilty. She just needed someone to hear her. I thanked Emma and ended the call before my voice could break. I called Jack next. I asked the same question. He said yes, Mom had mentioned it. He said it was during one of their video calls. She'd said she missed the version of me that used to take walks with her and ask questions that weren't about calendars or finances. Jack had suggested she tell me directly. Sarah said she'd tried, but I didn't have space for it. I asked Jack if he thought I'd been a bad husband. He said no. He said I'd been a distant one. That night I went through our photos. Sarah kept them in albums, chronological and labeled. The early years showed us hiking, camping, sitting on beaches. We were touching in most of them. My arm around her shoulders, her hand on my knee. Somewhere around year 15, the photos changed. We were still together, but with space between us. By year 20, most pictures were of Sarah alone or with the kids. I was in the background or missing entirely. There was one from the last year. Emma had taken it when she visited for Sarah's birthday. We were at the dining table. Sarah was looking at the camera, smiling. I was looking at my phone. Emma had caught the exact moment that defined the end of our marriage. Sarah trying to be present, me trying to be anywhere else. I began making changes that felt too late to matter. I closed my laptop during meals, even though I ate alone. I sat in the living room instead of the study. I walked the neighborhood loop Sarah used to take each morning. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. Colleagues noticed the shift. A partner called and asked if I was all right. I said I was managing. He said my billable hours had dropped. I said I was aware. He suggested I consider taking a formal leave if I needed it. I said I'd think about it. I didn't take a leave, but I stopped accepting new cases. I worked through existing files and declined the rest. My assistant asked if I was planning to retire. I said I didn't know yet. What I knew was that Sarah had structured the will to force exactly this. She'd made it impossible for me to sell the house and relocate to a place where I could build the same patterns with different scenery. She'd locked me in place, physically and financially, betting that I'd eventually do what I was doing now. Sit still. Notice. Reckon with the cost of my choices. 3 months after finding the letter, I received a call from Sarah's clinic. The manager said they were sorting through Sarah's locker and office. They'd found some personal items. She asked if I wanted to pick them up or if they should mail them. I said I'd come by. The clinic was 20 minutes away, a low brick building near the hospital. I'd been there once, maybe twice, in 31 years. Sarah had invited me to staff events. I'd usually declined, citing work. She stopped inviting. The manager met me in the lobby. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with the efficient kindness of someone used to managing difficult conversations. She handed me a box and said Sarah had been the heart of their practice. She said patients still asked about her. She said they missed her. I thanked her and carried the box to my car. Inside were framed photos, a coffee mug, a sweater, and a small notebook. I opened the notebook in the parking lot. It was a journal. Sarah had kept it for the last 2 years of her life. The entries were short, daily reflections written in the same precise hand as the letter. I read them in order. They chronicled her illness, her work, her growing sense of distance from me. She wrote about making excuses for my absence to friends who asked how we were doing. She wrote about pretending she didn't mind eating alone most nights. She wrote about the specific moment she realized I would never change unless something forced me to. The moment had been 6 months before she died. We were in bed. I was on my laptop, responding to emails. She asked if I could put it away. I said I just needed 5 more minutes. She turned off her light and rolled over. She wrote that she lay there listening to me type and understood that I wasn't going to notice her fading unless she made it impossible to ignore. That was when she hired Davidson to draft the will with the missing page. She wrote that she'd explained what she wanted. He'd tried to talk her out of it. He said it was unusual and potentially confusing. She said that was the point. She wanted me to have to look for it. She wanted me to have to care enough to find it. She wrote that she didn't know if it would work. She wrote that maybe I'd just accept the gap and move on. But she wanted to try. She wanted to believe that somewhere underneath the billing hours and the client calls, there was still a version of me that remembered how to be present with the people I loved. I read the journal cover to cover sitting in the clinic parking lot. When I finished, I called Emma. She answered quickly, her voice tight. I said I found Mom's journal. She asked where. I told her. Then I said I understood now. I said I understood what I'd done and what Mom had tried to tell me. I said I was sorry I made her feel invisible. Emma was quiet. Then she said, she didn't want you to feel guilty. She wanted you to wake up. I said I was awake now. Emma said, good. Stay that way. We talked for an hour. She told me things Sarah had said over the years, small comments about wishing I'd ask about her day or remember the names of her colleagues. Emma said she'd thought about confronting me herself, but didn't want to insert herself between her parents. She said she regretted that now. I told her it wasn't her responsibility to fix her parents' marriage. She said, no, but I could have told you what you were losing. I called Jack after. It was morning in Seoul. He listened while I explained what I'd found. When I finished, he said, Mom always said you were smart about everything except people. I asked if he was angry with me. He said no. He said he was sad for both of us. He said Mom had been a steady presence his whole life, and I'd been a distant one, and that felt like a loss even though I was still alive. I asked if he thought it was too late to change that. He said, I don't know. I guess we'd have to try and see. That night I sat at the dining table where Sarah had refinished the wood and made thousands of meals and tried to talk to me about anything other than logistics. I wrote her a letter I'd never be able to send. I told her I was sorry. I told her I finally understood what she'd been trying to say. I told her I wished I'd listened sooner. When I finished, I folded the letter and put it in the box with the page 8 note. I thought about burning them, but that felt like erasing evidence of my failure. So I left them there, locked but accessible, in case I ever started to forget. I kept the house. I stopped talking about it as an asset and started referring to it as the place where Sarah built a life I'd been too distracted to fully inhabit. I refinished the front porch railing, something I'd promised to do for 3 years. I planted flowers in the beds she'd maintained. I learned the names of the neighbors she'd known for decades. I cut my hours further. I took a part-time consulting role that let me work remotely on my own schedule. I used the extra time to visit Emma in Portland and to plan a trip to Seoul to see Jack. I started hiking again, the trails Sarah and I used to walk when the kids were small. My knees hurt, but I went anyway. At night I sat in the living room instead of the study. I read books instead of case files. Let the silence be silence instead of filling it with the noise of constant productivity. I taught myself to sit with discomfort instead of working through it. The 5-year restriction felt less like a punishment and more like a gift. It gave me time to notice what Sarah had built and what I'd ignored. It gave me space to become someone who might deserve what she'd tried to give me. It kept me still long enough to understand that presence isn't the same as proximity. A year after finding the letter, I received a message from Davidson. He said he hoped I'd found what I was looking for in Sarah's estate materials. He said she'd been clear about her intentions, and he'd honored them as best he could. He said he hoped I understood why. I called him back. I said I understood completely. I thanked him for helping her. He said, she loved you very much. She just needed you to see it. I said I saw it now. He wished me well and ended the call. I stood in the kitchen where Sarah had asked me when we stopped talking. I finally had an answer. We stopped talking when I stopped listening. We stopped being people who talked when I decided that efficiency mattered more than presence. We stopped being a marriage when I treated our life together like another account to manage. The missing page had been her last attempt to teach me what she'd been trying to say for years. That love isn't about logistics. That showing up means more than providing. That you can lose someone slowly, over years, simply by choosing work over witness. I keep the box in her desk drawer. I read the letter and the journal entries when I start to slip back into old patterns. They remind me that Sarah didn't leave me with anger. She left me with an assignment. Become the person who notices. Become the person who asks. Become the person who stays. I won't know if I succeed until the 5 years are up and I have the choice to sell or stay. But I know what she wanted me to learn. That home isn't the structure. It's the choice to remain present in it. And that love isn't a transaction. It's the decision, made daily, to see the person in front of you as more than a role to fulfill. I owed her that while she was alive. I owe her memory the effort to finally get it right. The missing page wasn't a gap in the will. It was a space she left for me to fill with the kind of attention I should have given all along.